Hey there, kiddos. It's Mr. Duncan. I am stuck in the United States under half a foot of snow, but never fear because today we're going to talk more about China. So as we talked about last night in your homework video, the Opium War had a terrible effect on China. This was especially true in the Canton area, which was the place where you had to trade in China if you wanted to trade with China. Remember, the trade monopoly was centered here at Canton. So the businesses around Canton did really, really well back in the old days. Further, China, as you know, has a history of feeling like they are the best. They have this feeling of cultural superiority. And now that they've lost to a European army, people start to question that. But even faster, they start to blame the rulers. Remember who are Qing dynasty rulers. And then lastly, the cause of the last war, the opium, still continued to flow into Chinese ports. And as we talked about, this completely destroyed their economy, sending silver back to the British as well. It hurt their productivity with so many addicted opiate users. Now, one of the quickest reactions to all of this would be a great rebellion called the Taiping Rebellion. And it happens down in the Canton area in a place called the Guangdong province. And there's a farmer named Hong Shixuan, and as the screen says, he tried to take the civil service exam to get a job in the Chinese government, and he tried 4 times and he failed 4 times. Here's the lad right here. Look at that hat. So obviously taking a test and failing it is really stressful, as you may know. However, this just isn't any test. This is a test to completely change your life. So this is really like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He takes it 4 times and he fails it 4 times. After the 4th time, he had this crazy dream revision, but he couldn't really understand it. He takes the test one last time, and guess what? He fails it. And after this, he goes to Canton, where he meets a lot of different types of people, including a Christian missionary from the great state of Tennessee in the United States, a Southern Baptist missionary called Issachar J. Roberts. And Issachar Roberts teaches Hong Shixuan all about Christianity, and then all of a sudden, aha! The vision that he had makes total sense. I hope you're sitting down for this. He believed that in this vision, God had chosen him to be his second son, the little brother of Jesus. And Hong, as the second son of God, had been tasked with overthrowing the Qing dynasty to remove the Manchus from ruling China, and then there would be peace and prosperity for China once again. Now this would be called the Taiping Rebellion because once the Qing had been defeated, the Chinese would set up what's called the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace, and Hong would be the leader of it. To join this rebellion, you needed to do a lot of things to prove your membership and your dedication. The first is you had to write out all the sins that you'd ever committed in your life, and also you had to write down ways that you would correct them. Secondly, you had to promise to stop doing bad things, vices, such as opium, alcohol, gambling, prostitution, and cheating on your husband or wife. And lastly, this was an equal opportunity rebellion, meaning men and women could serve. However, they served in individual units. Women actually served in all female fighting units, which was something that's sort of new for this part of the world. So we have to ask the question, why did so many people join this rebellion? Because obviously it is a bit of a crazy rebellion to join. The leader believes that he's Jesus Christ's little brother who's been tasked with overthrowing the Chinese government. Well, the first reason is that there are a lot of people who are really unhappy in this part of China. Remember, the Opium War really hurt a lot of businesses in the Canton area. Secondly, people really blame the Qing leadership for letting this happen. It's easier to blame the leaders, especially if the leaders aren't Chinese. Remember, they are Manchus. And then lastly, Hong is promising something that sounds very appealing, to make China prosperous once again. And by sort of going back to the traditional ways in their culture. Now you can see on this map sort of where his rebellion took place, and it starts where you can see the red lines, and you can see how he's marching around. The areas that he is really focused on are farm areas in southern China. He's avoiding a lot of the big cities because it's easier to attract new followers in the farmlands because he's a farmer. So he's sort of like a Robin Hood figure who's attracting more members. And you can see in the purple, these are areas that are controlled by the rebels, and eventually they will settle in the capital city of Nanjing at the very north of this purple area. Now this rebellion, even though it lasted for almost 10 years, eventually fails. The question we have to ask is why. Now one of the answers is that when he takes Nanjing, his capital, this actually gives his enemy, the Qing government, a target. Eventually, the Qing armies will surround Nanjing in what's called a siege, and then they will cut off all fresh water and fresh food, fresh supplies, and will basically wait out the Taipings in the middle. And so Nanjing becomes a city where people are literally eating anything to survive. They're eating leather, they're eating tree bark. It's really, really nasty. Another big criticism of this rebellion is that Hung isn't very good at getting allies. For instance, there are a lot of people who could have really helped his cause, including scholars, the upper class or landowners, and foreign armies, but all will fail to support him because they're not comfortable with his vision or with his sort of skewed or different alternative take on Christianity. And then overall, his movement simply lacked organization. He was really good at fighting these battles as he was moving from territory to territory. However, it's much harder to set up a new government than it is to win a battle. So when he actually set up a capital city, this was sort of the beginning of the end, because now he had to try to set up a new organization, which he simply lacked. Now, this whole movement was horrible for China. In the history of the world, I hope you're listening to this, in the history of the world, this single event caused more deaths than any other event ever. So this has to be a victory for the Qing dynasty, right? The Taiping Rebellion failed. Wrong. As I just said, the Taipings were defeated, but along the way, 20 to 30 million people died directly due to fighting. And another 30 million people died due to starvation, because guess where most of this fighting took place? In the crop-heavy south of China. So they're fighting in the pastures and the fields where all the crops are. So when you're destroying these crops and you're killing the farmers, China cannot be fed. China, with the largest population in the world, will really feel the brunt of this rebellion. Now, obviously, this tells the leadership in China that people are not happy. Oh yeah, and if that's not bad enough for China, during this rebellion, you have a foreign invasion with the Second Opium War, with the British and the French invading China near Beijing and burning down the emperor's winter palace. Again, this is a terrible time for China. So as we can see, clearly China needs to change because a lot of things are going badly for them. However, they can't see that they have to change. We see some limited reform movements, but they don't really do a lot. The first is called the self-strengthening movement. This happened in the 1870s. Now, the big thing about this movement is they're trying to change China without changing its culture or its tradition. This motto for the self-strengthening movement was East for essence, West for practical use. So they're keeping their culture, they're keeping their traditions like Confucianism and bureaucracy and legalism and Taoism and all of these things. However, what they're saying is that we need to adopt more modern ways of making weapons. We need to adopt better technology. So basically, if you think about this like an apple sort of core and the outer part, the core what is China's culture, tradition, remains the same. The outer part, the skin, is changing to be more competitive with the West. The problem with this, people still weren't comfortable. They weren't ready for any change. To give you an example, the Chinese started building railroads. However, a lot of people got really nervous that the railroads were simply going to be used by Europeans to help colonize them, which is a good fear to have because that's what happened in India with the British. They also saw the railroads as, quote, cutting the dragon's vein, end quote. You have this pretty Taoist countryside where nature is just absolutely beautiful, and now you have railroad tracks which are ugly, and then on the railroad tracks you have these big loud trains that are emitting black smoke. So they see this as not only ruining their culture but ruining their nature as well. Are you ready for a good statistic? In this time period, tiny Japan, their neighboring sort of rival, will have 10 times the amount of railroads laid at this time in history than the Chinese would, which is simply amazing. Now, as we said, the Chinese wouldn't make big-time reforms. As an example, when they laid their railroad lines, then they dug them up again, okay? And it wouldn't be until an eye-opening event like a major defeat in a war to Japan that they would call for even more change. The second reform movement is called the 100 Days Movement, or the 100 Days Reforms, because these reforms lasted, you got it, 100 days. Now, as the last reform movement was called East for Essence and West for Practical Use, this could be called West for Essence and West for Practical Use, because China is panicking. They're trying to change everything and make everything like the West to become instantly competitive with their rivals. It's almost like with Europe, maybe they felt like Europe got lucky and defeated them in the Opium Wars. However, Japan shouldn't be defeating China in war. So now they are really panicking, trying to fix themselves very quickly. The good thing in this is that it was supported by the emperor. The bad thing is that the emperor wasn't very powerful and was taken out of power by his aunt, who's very conservative, and she goes by the name Cixi, C-I-X-I. And she is very conservative and has a power base with conservative elements in China, like the army. So again, this is simply too much change to last, which is why it only lasts 100 days. And here's the Empress right here. Take a look at those fingernails, folks. As another statistic that China is losing control, all of these European powers plus Japan start to really divide China up in what are called spheres of influence. Now, these are like colonies because in these areas of China, these European countries plus Japan get a lot of power. Okay, they have cultural influence, they have economic benefits from this area, and they also get political control. You can see it right here in the different colors, just who has control of what territories. In the north, you have Russian lands. Near Beijing, on the Yellow Sea, or what's called Port Arthur, you have some German territory. The British have a lot of land around Nanjing and Shanghai and the Yangtze River, as well as further south. And then you also have some Japanese territories near Taiwan. And then lastly, some French territory near southern China and what is today Vietnam. This is a better picture or cartoon of what's happening to China. Because you can see you have all these European powers plus Japan, and they have a pie in front of them. And you see how they're dividing up each piece of their pie, which is basically what they just did to Africa. Now, the United States gets involved and starts something called the Open Door Notes, which is sort of like the Berlin Conference of Africa, but it's the opposite. Instead of saying that we should compete over China, it says that we shouldn't compete over China. Instead, China should be open for everyone to trade, meaning you shouldn't have to have a sphere of influence in China to be able to have better trading rights with China. Now, this looks to be really nice by the United States because it actually decreased pressure on countries trying to get more and more land in China. But you have to ask yourself, Why would the U.S. be so nice and propose equal trading rights in China? And then the answer emerges. The United States did not have a sphere of influence. Of course they would want equal trading rights. Now, all of this will lead to people getting upset in China. Now, as we said last time, the Taiping Rebellion really blamed the Qing government on not being able to deal with the outside influence or the outside threats. In the late 1800s, there's another group of people that are upset. They don't necessarily blame the Qing government. They see the Qing government is too weak to do anything. They instead blame the Europeans. And the straw that really breaks the camel's back here is in northern China, where an international incident allowed for the Russians and the Germans to get more land, more spheres of influence. So this really took things too far for these rebel groups. The most famous of these groups are called the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. Now, to you or me, we would look at this group and see that they look like ninjas, which is basically how they acted and how they fought. They were an all-male organization. They believed that having females around would distract them. However, there was a female version of the Boxers, as they will be called, and they were called the Red Lanterns, and their job was to fight against European women who were trying to distract these Boxers. So this is a pretty cool time in history. Now, the Boxers truly believed that if they drank a certain type of water, like almost like a holy water, then their bodies could not be damaged by European bullets, which is crazy to think about. However, it also shows you that they are hoping that this is true. They are this desperate that if they believe this, then it will happen, meaning this is how much they want to be free of European influence. Now, the Boxers are called the Boxers by the West because they fight like boxers, okay? Not all that innovative. However, when they start fighting, they try to destroy Western symbols to try to cleanse China of the West. So they start to attack things like churches and railroads and electric lights and anything that can be bought from a Western shop, they try to destroy. Now, for me, the big question is, if you're the Empress, Cixi, what do you do here? Do you join the rebels or do you fight the rebels? You would maybe fight the rebels because you need to maintain control and you don't want them to maybe overthrow you. Secondly, you may join the rebels because you believe in the same thing. You both hate the fact that the West has so much influence in China. Guess what they do? Exactly. The Qing government joins the rebels because they have the same ideas, the same goals, and they cannot defeat the rebels, so they might as well join them. Now, the West will form something called the Eight-Nation Alliance, which you can see in a photograph right here, a lot of different uniforms. If you look carefully, you can see a sepoy in this picture. Can you find the sepoy? The Eight-Nation Alliance, as it says on the board, is made up of countries such as Japan, Russia, Germany, France, England, the US, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. They all have a stake in China. Now, this is a Japanese print, and you can see all 8 nations represented. So you can see a lot of different uniforms and flags, which has to be really interesting that you have so many teams fighting on the same side. As you can imagine, China doesn't really stand a chance. They win a couple early battles, but then when these 8 nations really start to team up, they are able to pretty easily fight back and win. And in this case, they actually take control of Beijing. Now, this is really bad for China because now you have foreign armies actually living in the capital of China. This would be like if the United States lost a war to Canada and the Canadians kept their armies just down the street from the White House. So really China is reminded that they lost daily. Even worse, the Chinese now have to pay a lot of money to the teams that defeated them. In 2010 dollars, this was about $61 billion paid to the winning side. Now you can see in this map of Beijing just how badly this worked out for China, and these are all the different countries that get different parts of the city. If you look in the yellow areas, this is territory that the British would occupy. If you look in the blue areas, this is French territory. The light green area will be American territory. The dark green area will be Japanese lands. And then the red territory would be German territory within Beijing. So you have all these different countries that are now dividing the capital city of Beijing. If you think about this, just about 50 years earlier, the Chinese were telling outsiders they could only trade with them at one port city in China. Now they have foreign armies living within their capital city. So the 1800s, the 19th century for China has been terrible. So the question here is, what do you think happens next? Where does China go from here? If you are the emperor or the empress of China, what do you do? That's your question. I want you to write down your answer to this in a short paragraph. And I hope you have a nice day and a wonderful weekend. And hopefully I will be here on Monday to teach you in person rather than from afar. Bye, guys.